Hello, I'm Mercedes Stephenson, and this is the West Block Politics, Perspectives, and Players. Nearly 2 months ago, leaders from Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. signed the new free trade agreement, but none of the legislative bodies of these three countries have actually ratified the deal. And as the government shutdown continues south of the border over President Trump's border wall, getting this deal ratified is certainly not on the list of immediate priorities. Where does Mexico stand on all of this? Well, joining me to discuss that now from Houston is Agustín Barrios Gómez, former Congressman from Mexico and founding member of the Mexican Council on Foreign Relations. Mr. Gómez, Mexico has not ratified the new North American Free Trade Agreement at this point, like Canada and like the U.S., but why has Mexico not made a move to sign off yet?
Well, our legislature is being very practical about it. We only have to ratify it in the Senate, unlike the U.S. that needs to ratify it in both houses of Congress, because for us it's a treaty, for them it's an agreement. And so on our side, the Senate has said if there's any possibility of the U.S. Congress making any change, that they'd rather not ratify something that will be changed by the U.S. Congress.
So what do you think the timeline on it looks like then in terms of when it ends up in front of the Mexican legislature?
I don't see the Mexican legislature as really having a timeline. It is the U.S. legislature that has the timeline, because for all practical purposes, it's the only person that actually wants to have this over NAFTA is Donald John Trump. So in the case of Mexico, the status quo is fine as long as NAFTA is in service. Then there's no real rush to get this through. With respect to the U.S. Congress, it's my understanding that because the International Trade Commission, which is a U.S. government agency, needs to do the evaluation, that we're not, because of the government shutdown, they're not working. So that takes at least 2 months. And of course, legislatures aren't really very agile bodies. And so we could be looking at late 2019, 2020, if at all.
Wow. So basically, there's no hard deadline for any of the countries to sign this. And at this point, it doesn't look like much of a motivation because Trump hasn't pulled out of NAFTA. Is that a risk, though, if he's not getting his way?
Oh, absolutely. And actually, he said as much. He has been very clear that if they don't give him his agreement, he will actually go ahead and send that famous letter pulling the United States out of NAFTA. And what would happen there, the way this plays out is that then basically the letter would go out. Then there would be all sorts of legal challenges on behalf of different organizations in the United States that would say that the U.S. that the American president doesn't have that authority because the implementing legislation is still on the books. And so that would basically add uncertainty. The implementing legislation, in other words, NAFTA in its core, which is the actual law, would stay on the books, and there would just be uncertainty, which would reduce investment in both Canada and Mexico, which at the end of the day is also one of the main objectives of Donald John Trump.
Well, speaking of costs and money and who's going to pay for what, how much rhetoric is coming from the U.S. over the border wall and who will pay for that wall? President Trump said on a recent visit to the U.S.-Mexico border that Mexico would pay for the wall through the free trade agreement. Is that resonating in Mexico, and how is it affecting the willingness of Mexican politicians to sign off on this deal?
No, I've actually been surprised at the maturity of Mexican politicians in general. Because it's basically seen as noise. All of these aggressions right now are seen as noise. There is a rise in anti-American sentiment. It's very difficult, of course, because Mexico has been chosen as the main red herring for this administration, and since the beginning, since that fateful day on the 16th of June 2015, when his candidacy was announced. It was Mexico that was center stage, and it has been Mexico since then. And now it turns out that Mexico is basically the reason why the United States government has shut down, which is ridiculous. The U.S. and Mexico have the most intense relationship between two large countries anywhere. We have the most legally crossed border in the world, and I can tell you, fortunately, that border is functioning basically normally. I mean, we have 350 million border crossings per year through 330 ports of entry. So beyond the rhetoric, the border is actually a collection of binational communities that live their lives as they always have, crossing back and forth. And fortunately, that has not yet been, in general, disrupted. despite these caravans from Central America going up to Tijuana, which is San Isidro, which is the most legally crossed border station on the planet, with 100,000 people crossing back and forth every single day. And so, but in general, in the rest of the 330 ports of entry, there has been no major disruption. So most of this has actually been a tempest in a teacup, but of course, a very politically beneficial tempest in a teacup for somebody who wants to stoke fear-mongering, hatred, xenophobia, and everything that we've seen lately.
What has been the reaction and the feeling of people in Mexico when they hear some of the president's statements about illegal crossings, his claims about illegal immigrants posing a danger to Americans? What is the reaction like?
Well, I mean, I guess most of the reaction is basic horror. I think those who have been most affected have been those who actually have been closest to the United States. The people who are the professionals, the people in the MNCs, the people who actually had a much better image of the United States, not a United States like the one that we're seeing right now, not a United States that would be in any way cheering on racism, xenophobia, and taking pages out of the fascist playbook. I mean, all of this was a bigger surprise for those of us who have been in favor of pro-U.S. policies. And while the rest of the country has been sort of, there's a little bit of ennui or "I told you so" on behalf of these people, because I guess they never had expectations like many of the others who do deal with the United States on a day-to-day basis.
Finally, how would you describe relations between Mexico and the United States right now?
Well, just like Canada, I mean, so American prosperity and national security directly depend on a cooperative Mexico and Canada. The United States would basically be under existential threat if either of our two countries really took to heart all of the insults and all of the humiliation. And I think that the U.S. military, I am very well aware, knows that. The cooler heads, the adults in the room, they know that perfectly well. For the moment, anti-American sentiment has been put a lid on. I am actually very worried, because I think that it's just a matter of time that this will change. This could also happen in Canada. There's only so much, so many insults and so much humiliation that people are willing to take, and that's not a Mexican thing. That's sort of a human nature thing. So I think that Mexico and Canada really need to sit back down and start being clear about what we bring to the table. And in fact, we actually bring more to the table than the United States does, for the simple reason that the United States is 320 million people, and Canada is what, 37, 38. Mexico is 120. They have more to lose. They are the country with the most enemies in the world. And so I think Mexico and Canada have to be a little bit clearer of the fact that the United States is only a superpower insofar as we are cooperative and friendly neighbors, and we have been the best neighbors. And I think that that's something where we could work together.